She waited 8 years for a promise that never came true. But the night he finally returned, he did not come alone. What stood at her doorway that rain-soaked evening was not just the past. It was a truth she was never meant to discover. A child's voice broke the silence, and in that moment, everything she believed about love, loyalty, and time began to collapse. But the real shock was still waiting outside in the storm. Something was approaching the house that would change every decision she had ever made. And by the time the rain stopped, nothing would ever be the same again. After 8 years of love, she could not tolerate the excuse of waiting for the children to grow up. She immediately married someone else. The evening air was heavy with dust and silence in the small town. A slow wind moved through the narrow street outside her house. Inside, the room smelled faintly of old tea and fading hope. She sat near the window, watching the same road she had watched for 8 long years. Every passing motorbike sounded like a promise that never arrived. Her phone lay on the table, silent, unchanged, almost accusing her. She remembered every excuse he had given her over the years. The children are still small. We must wait for the right time. Just a little more patience. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the wooden chair. The wood felt rough against her skin, grounding her in a reality she no longer wanted. Outside, children laughed in a distant alley, their voices sharp and free. She felt something break quietly inside her chest. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a final, exhausted silence. That night, she did not cry. She did not argue. She simply stood up and closed the window. The next morning, she wore a simple dress she had never dared to wear before. The fabric felt lighter than her memories. She walked to the registrar office with steady steps that surprised even her. The corridor smelled of ink, paper, and cold metal fans spinning overhead. A man stood there waiting for her, calm and unfamiliar like a different life entirely. Her hands trembled only once when she signed the papers. Outside, the sun felt sharper, almost judgmental against her skin. People whispered when they saw her leave with someone else. But she did not turn back. That evening, the town felt different, as if it had lost something it never understood. She returned home only once to collect her remaining things. The house looked smaller than she remembered, almost relieved to let her go. A knock came at the door before she could leave. She opened it slowly, and the air around her seemed to freeze. The man she had waited 8 years for stood there, breathing heavily, eyes wide with disbelief. He looked at her hand, then at the stranger behind her, then back at her face as if searching for an answer that no longer existed. The silence between them grew thick, almost suffocating, filled with everything that was never said. And just as his lips began to move, her new life stepped forward beside her, casting a shadow across the threshold that changed everything again. The air inside the doorway felt heavier than stone. The man from her past stood frozen, his breath uneven, his eyes locked on her face as if trying to rewrite reality. Her hand remained steady beside the man she had just married. No fear remained in her expression, only a quiet firmness shaped by years of waiting. The old man stepped forward half a step, then stopped as if the ground itself refused him entry. His voice finally broke the silence, rough and uncertain, asking her what she had done. She looked at him without blinking. Her voice came out calm, almost unfamiliar to him. "You arrived 8 years too late." The words struck the room like a sudden crack in glass. The ceiling fan above them continued spinning, indifferent to the collapse happening below it. He glanced around the house, noticing the empty corners, the missing warmth, the absence of everything he had taken for granted. His lips trembled as he tried to speak again, but no sentence formed completely. The new man beside her shifted slightly, not aggressive, only present, like a boundary that could not be crossed. She stepped forward into the light spilling from the doorway. Dust particles floated around her like tiny sparks of memory burning out. She remembered every night she had waited by that same door, every sound of footsteps that never entered, every promise that dissolved into another excuse. Her chest tightened for a moment, but she did not step back. Instead, she reached into the small bag she carried. Inside it was a folded paper, worn at the edges, signed quietly earlier that day. She placed it on the small table near the entrance. The sound of paper touching would echo too loudly in the silence. The man from her past looked at it without touching it. His eyes slowly realized what it meant. Finality, irreversibility, A door closed without permission. His voice dropped lower, asking if everything between them could truly end so easily. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening to a memory that no longer belonged to her. Easily is not the word. Slowly is closer. 8 years is slow enough to disappear without notice. A sudden gust of wind entered through the open door, carrying the smell of distant rain. The curtains moved gently, brushing against her arm like a farewell she did not ask for. The man behind her placed a hand lightly near her shoulder, not claiming her, only standing with her. That simple gesture broke something in the air. The old man took another step forward, this time unable to stop himself. His eyes searched her face for the version of her that used to wait. But she was no longer there. Only someone shaped by absence remained. A distant sound of thunder rolled across the sky, deep and slow. The light in the house flickered for a brief moment, then steadied again. She finally turned her gaze fully to him, as if closing a long, unfinished sentence inside her mind. You kept asking for time. Time learned to live without you. His expression tightened, as if he had been struck without physical touch. Outside, neighbors gathered quietly, pretending not to watch, yet unable to move away. Whispers traveled through the air like thin smoke. She stepped slightly aside, preparing to leave the house completely. The threshold behind her felt colder now, almost empty of meaning. The man from her past reached out his hand, stopping just short of her arm, unable to cross the invisible distance she had created. And in that suspended moment, with the storm pressing closer outside and the silence stretching unbearably thin inside, another sound approached from the road. Slow footsteps mixing with something unexpected that none of them were prepared to face. The sound of footsteps grew clearer on the wet road outside. Slow, measured, unhurried, each step seemed to carry weight, as if the ground itself remembered who was walking. The crowd outside shifted slightly, curiosity tightening the air. Her eyes narrowed as she turned her head toward the entrance again. The man from her past also turned, confusion replacing his earlier certainty. The footsteps stopped right at the edge of the doorway. For a moment, nothing moved. Even the wind seemed to hesitate. Then a small figure appeared first in the doorway light. A child, standing still, soaked slightly from the mist outside, breathing unevenly from running. Behind the child, another smaller figure emerged, holding onto a worn piece of cloth. Silence deepened in the room. The woman felt her heart pause in a way she had not expected. The man from her past stepped forward instinctively, his face tightening with recognition and shock. The children did not speak at first. Their eyes moved from one adult to another, trying to understand the arrangement of strangers that once formed their world. The older child finally spoke in a low voice, asking why everyone was standing like this. The sound of that question struck harder than any accusation. The woman felt her breath slow, then steady. She knelt slightly, bringing herself closer to their level. Her voice softened as she asked what they were doing there alone. The older child hesitated, then pointed outside toward the road, saying they had followed someone. The man from her past took a step closer to them, his face now fully drained of color. He asked where their mother was. The younger child blinked slowly, confused by the question, and looked toward the woman instead of answering. The room shifted again into a deeper silence. The woman rose slowly, her expression unreadable now. The air felt tighter, almost suffocating, as if every breath belonged to a decision already made. The man beside her placed his hand gently at his side, watching without interrupting. Outside, the wind pushed against the open door, making it creak softly. The children moved a little closer into the house, drawn by warmth and familiarity that no longer fully existed. The man from her past finally spoke again, his voice breaking slightly as he asked if they were his children. The question hung in the air without answer. The woman looked at him for a long moment, her eyes steady but distant. The years between them seemed to gather into that single question, heavy and unspoken until now. She turned slightly away, walking toward the center of the room, where the light from the window fell unevenly across the floor. Her fingers touched the edge of the table, grounding her again. She remembered nights spent alone with feverish children, doors that stayed closed, promises that never returned in time. The memory was not sharp anymore. It was dull, like something worn down by repetition. The older child moved closer to her now, standing beside her without hesitation. The younger one followed after a moment, gripping her sleeve gently. That simple contact shifted something in the atmosphere again. The man from her past watched, his jaw tightening as realization began to form in uneven pieces. He whispered her name, but it sounded unfamiliar even to him. She did not respond immediately. Instead, she looked at the children, then at the man standing at the doorway behind her. Her voice came again, softer but clearer than before. Time does not return what it takes. The words were not loud, but they filled the entire house. The man from her past shook his head slightly, as if refusing to accept what was standing in front of him. He took another step forward, then stopped again, as if an invisible boundary pressed against his chest. The children shifted closer to her, sensing something they could not name but instinctively trusted. Outside, a distant rumble of thunder rolled again, closer this time. The sky darkened, pressing the evening into a deeper shade of gray. The man beside her finally moved forward, not toward the confrontation, but toward the children. He crouched slightly, offering a calm presence that did not demand understanding. The children studied him quietly, uncertain but not afraid. The woman watched this interaction, her expression softening for a brief moment before tightening again. The man from her past noticed everything, each detail adding weight to what he could no longer reverse. His voice lowered, asking her why she had never told him. She exhaled slowly, as if that question belonged to a different lifetime. Telling requires someone who listens. The room seemed to shrink around those words. The rain outside began to fall, light at first, tapping gently against the roof, then slowly growing heavier. The sound filled the gaps between them, making silence even more pronounced. The children moved closer to the woman, now fully standing beside her. She placed one hand lightly on each of their shoulders, a steadying gesture, a final alignment of what remained. The man from her past looked at them together, his eyes trembling with something that was no longer anger but loss that had no direction. He stepped back slowly toward the doorway. Each movement felt heavier than the last. The threshold behind him seemed narrower now, as if the house itself no longer recognized his right to enter. The woman watched him retreat without following. Her face remained still, but something inside her shifted like a door finally settling into its frame after years of wind. The rain outside grew stronger, blurring the edges of the world beyond the house. And as the man reached the edge of the road again, something unexpected emerged from the rain, moving toward the house with slow and uncertain steps that made everyone inside fall completely silent once more. The rain thickened into a curtain, blurring the road beyond the gate. Every drop struck the ground with a heavier rhythm, as if the sky itself had grown impatient. The man at the doorway stopped walking. His eyes narrowed, trying to focus through the moving veil of water. A shape was approaching, slowly, dragging something behind it. The woman inside the house felt her breath tighten without knowing why. The children stayed close to her, sensing the change in the air. The man beside her shifted slightly, his attention fully locked on the approaching figure. The man from her past stepped forward again, forgetting distance, forgetting pride, pulled by something deeper than thought. The shape grew clearer with each step. A woman, soaked completely, hair clinging to her face, feet struggling against the mud. Behind her, a small bundle wrapped in cloth moved slightly with each step she took. The silence inside the house broke in fragments. The children looked up at the woman beside them, then toward the approaching stranger. Confusion filled their faces. The woman at the door did not move. Not yet. The man from her past whispered something under his breath, barely audible, as recognition slowly formed. The approaching woman finally reached the edge of the doorway light. She stopped there, breathing heavily, rainwater dripping from her chin. Her eyes lifted slowly toward the people inside. And then she spoke one name. Not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to freeze everything. The name was the man from her past. The air changed instantly. He froze completely, as if the ground beneath him had disappeared. The woman inside the house felt something twist in her chest. Not jealousy, not fear, but clarity forming too quickly to resist. The children moved closer together. The bundle in the stranger's arms shifted again, a faint sound escaping it. The approaching woman stepped inside without waiting for permission. Water dripped onto the wooden floor, spreading slowly like dark memories returning. Her eyes moved directly to the children, then to the woman standing beside them, then to the man who had just arrived at the doorway. Her lips trembled before she spoke again. I finally found you. The words landed like a stone dropped into deep water. The man from her past shook his head slightly, stepping back as if trying to escape a truth already closing in around him. The woman inside the house remained still, watching everything unfold with an expression that no longer belonged to confusion. The approaching woman lowered the bundle carefully onto the floor. A small child inside it moved again, letting out a soft sound. The younger child beside the woman stepped forward slightly, drawn by instinct rather than understanding. The older child did the same. The room filled with overlapping breaths, none of them steady. The man beside the woman placed a gentle hand forward, not stopping, only preparing. The woman at the door finally turned her gaze fully toward the man from her past. Her voice became steadier now. You said you were waiting. I waited too. The man from her past closed his eyes briefly, as if trying to shut out everything at once. When he opened them again, they were filled with something far heavier than denial. The woman inside the house slowly stepped forward for the first time since the rain began. Each step measured, each step deliberate. She stopped near the center of the room, where all lines of distance seemed to meet. The rain outside continued to fall harder, striking the roof like a relentless judgment. The children stood between all of them now, caught in a space they did not understand but instinctively feared. The woman who had arrived first looked at them again, her expression softening for a moment before hardening again as she turned back to the man. Her voice lowered. You left before I could tell you everything. The man from her past whispered that it was not true, but the words lacked strength. The woman inside the house finally spoke, her voice calm but cutting through everything. 8 years is not a mistake. It is a life. The man beside her remained silent, but his presence felt like an anchor that could not be ignored. The second woman shifted slightly, holding the child closer. The child's faint cry filled the room again, breaking the fragile stillness. The older children moved instinctively toward it, unsure but drawn by something deeper than thought. The man from her past took one more step forward, then stopped again, as if the weight of all 3 lives pressed against him at once. His voice cracked as he asked what he was supposed to do now. No one answered immediately. Only the rain answered, louder than before. The woman inside the house looked at him for a long moment, her expression no longer holding anger, only distance carved by time. Then she turned slightly toward the children beside her. Her hand rested gently on their shoulders again. And in that moment, the house no longer felt like a place of waiting. It felt like a place where endings had already chosen their shape. Outside, thunder rolled so close that the windows trembled softly. The second woman stepped fully inside now, no longer hesitating. And as she crossed the threshold, the past and present finally collided in a way that none of them could undo, while the child on the floor let out another small sound that pulled every gaze downward at once. The small sound from the child on the floor echoed softly through the room. It was fragile, almost invisible, yet it carried more weight than all the arguments before it. Every person in the house turned toward it at the same time. The rain outside seemed to pause for a fraction of a second, as if even the storm was listening. The second woman slowly lowered herself to the ground. Her hands shook as she adjusted the cloth around the child. The child blinked slowly, eyes half open, breathing uneven but alive. The man from the past took one step forward, then another, his movements no longer controlled by thought. The woman who had once waited 8 years did not stop him. She simply watched. Not with anger, not with hope, with something emptier. The man beside her remained still, but his eyes followed every movement carefully. The older children stood frozen, their grip tightening on the woman's clothes, as if she was the only stable point left in the collapsing structure of adults around them. The second woman spoke again, her voice weaker now. He was not supposed to grow up without you seeing him. The words hit the man like something physical. He stopped completely. His breath became uneven. The room felt smaller again, tighter, as if the walls were leaning inward. The woman who had married him looked down briefly, then away, as if the truth was something she had already begun to accept long before this moment. The child on the floor moved slightly, letting out another faint sound, searching for warmth that was now surrounded by too much silence. The man from the past finally knelt beside the child. His hands hovered in the air for a moment, uncertain, afraid of what touch might confirm. Then slowly, He placed his hand near the child's small fingers. The child instinctively grasped it. That single movement broke something in his expression. His eyes closed tightly, as if holding back years of absence at once. The second woman watched him without speaking, her strength fading into exhaustion. The rain outside intensified again, striking the roof with relentless rhythm. Inside, no one moved. Only breathing filled the space now. The older children slowly stepped closer to the second woman, drawn by the child she held. Their curiosity overcame their hesitation. The woman who had once waited watched them carefully, her hand still resting on their shoulders, but now looser, less protective, more uncertain. The man beside her finally spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "This cannot be solved in a single night." The words did not comfort anyone, but they were true. The man from the past opened his eyes again, still kneeling, still holding the child's fragile hand. He looked at the second woman, then at the first woman, then at the children standing between them all. His voice came out broken. "I did not know." The second woman gave a faint, tired smile that carried no warmth. "You never stayed long enough to know anything." The silence that followed was heavier than before. The woman who had remarried slowly stepped forward again, her movements calm but final. She looked at all of them one by one, as if memorizing the shape of a moment she would never return to. Her voice came softly. "This house is no longer waiting for anyone." The words settled into the room like dust after collapse. The man beside her lowered his gaze slightly, accepting something unspoken. The children clung closer to her, sensing departure, even without understanding it. The second woman tightened her hold on the child, as if afraid the world might take him again. The man from the past remained kneeling, unable to move, unable to speak. The rain outside began to slow, but the heaviness inside the room did not change. The woman who had once waited 8 years turned toward the door. Each step she took away from the center felt lighter than the years she had carried. The man beside her followed without hesitation. Together they moved toward the exit, not as escape, but as continuation. Behind them, the second woman lowered her head beside the child, whispering something only he could hear. The man from the past finally stood, but did not follow. His eyes stayed on the child in his hands, as if that was the only part of his life that still made sense. The older children watched the two figures leaving, their silence deep and confused. The woman reached the doorway and paused for the briefest moment. The wind touched her face softly, carrying the last breath of a storm. She did not turn back, and as she stepped into the rain with the man beside her, the house behind them remained filled with lives that had finally stopped waiting for each other, while the night slowly began to close over everything that had once been called love. The rain had softened into a thin mist by the time the night deepened. The house behind them stood dim and still, its lights flickering once before settling into a steady glow. No one inside spoke for a long time. The sound of breathing, the faint movement of children, and the distant rhythm of rain became the only language left in the room. The man from the past remained standing near the child on the floor. His hand still trembled where the small fingers had once held him. He did not move away. Not anymore. The second woman sat quietly, her back resting against the wall, exhaustion finally overtaking every emotion she had carried for so long. The older children stayed close to her, unsure, but slowly beginning to understand that closeness did not always mean answers. Outside, the road was empty. The woman who had once waited 8 years walked forward into the wet night without looking back. The man beside her matched her pace without question. Their footsteps were slow, steady, and no longer searching for anything behind them. The air felt different now. Not lighter, not heavier, just finished in a way that no one could undo. They reached the end of the street where the lamps cast long reflections on the wet ground. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The woman looked at the distant horizon where the sky was still holding the last traces of storm. Her expression carried no regret, only quiet acceptance. The man beside her finally broke the silence. "Do you ever think about going back?" She did not answer immediately. The question floated between them like something already answered long ago. After a long pause, she spoke softly. "Going back requires a place that still waits. That place no longer exists." He nodded slowly, understanding without needing more words. The wind moved gently through the trees, carrying away the last remnants of rain. Behind them, the house grew smaller, its shape blending into the night until it felt like part of memory rather than reality. Inside that house, the man from the past finally sat down beside the child, holding him closer now without hesitation. The second woman watched quietly, no longer resisting the reality that had formed around them. The older children leaned against her, their breathing slow, their questions fading into silence. Time, which had once been the reason for waiting, no longer felt like an excuse. It felt like something that had already passed. Outside, the woman who had left 8 years of waiting stood still for a final moment. The man beside her looked at her profile, then ahead into the road. There was no destination waiting for them, only movement. She took a slow breath, then stepped forward again. This time, not away from anything, but toward whatever came next. The night closed gently around them, not as an ending, but as a quiet continuation of lives that had finally stopped holding on to what could not return.